Voilà, très bien. Alors, je vais faire le partage. Et voilà. Ce soir, on va faire chapitre 5, partie 2. We're doing 5-2 this evening. And normally we would have had class last night. However, I was still trying to fix this huge problem on the test, which I got fixed, yay. And so we're having class tonight instead. I also wanted to let everybody know, and now that I remember, I need to be sure and put a note on, I'm going to write myself a note. My office hours need to change by 1/2 hour. I'm going to change my office hours from from 6 to 8 on Wednesday to 6:30 to 8:30 on Wednesday. My other job is with Habitat for Humanity, and we have changed our hours there a little bit. So in order for me to get home and get started on office hours, I need a little more time. So again, our office hours from now on Wednesday nights will be 6:30 to 8:30 instead of 6 to 8. So I'll be sure and let Miss Susan in the office know, and I'll change it everywhere that I can remember to change it. And I'll put an announcement on Blazeview to remind you as well. And as always, please grab me if you want to just meet together on Skype, or if you want to meet on Blackboard Collaborate for one-on-one work or discussion of anything. And that's all. Or we can do FaceTime or whatever with our phones. We have so much technology at our disposal, so we might as well take advantage of it. So yell if there's some way that you would like us to take advantage of technology for you to have some extra time with me for whatever help you may need. So, on va regarder la présentation pour partie 2 du chapitre 5, again during part 2 of chapter 5. I'm trying to remember, there was one other announcement, I think. Well, don't forget that your test is still available through Friday night. Friday at 11:59 p.m. is when the test will close finally. And I do apologize again for all of the craziness. However, it's working now, and all is well. And I wanted also to let you know, those of you who've had French with us at VSU before may already know this, or if you've had French on GoView before, that we usually have an audio component on the test, and normally the audio files do some wacky things sometimes with Blazeview and GoView. And so there may be one student who takes the test and absolutely all the audios work during the audio comprehension section, and then there will be somebody else who takes it and, you know, only 80% of the audios work, and then somebody else will take it and a different 80% of the audios will work. And this is regardless of the fact that when I go through it and test it, it all works fine, but they simply will not always show up for you to click on. If they're there, they should work. They usually work if they show up. But sometimes they, for whatever reason, do not show up when you open each question. So I have left some spaces with some instructions on the test so that you can take note of which audios did not work for you, if any don't work for you. And you can make note of that so that I can just adjust your grade accordingly. So again, if any of the audios during the audio comprehension section do not work, be sure to note those audio numbers in the spaces provided. You'll see what I'm talking about when you get into the test. And that way, as I go through the test, I can adjust it right then for you personally. If they all work for you, then yay. And this doesn't mean that if anybody's tempted to say that a certain one doesn't work when it really did, but it was a really hard one. I will tell you that your grade will be a little weird. It won't necessarily be worse or better, but it'll just be not exactly representative. Um, if if I'm having to adjust too many of those, basically it just brings your potential points down compared to everybody else. So yes, you won't be counted off on those that didn't work, but the more points, the better on the tests, because obviously then everything is worth a little bit less, and it helps all through the test. So anyway, just note if any don't work. And also when you first pull up the audios, sometimes they all start simultaneously. You will just have to wait for them to all play and mute your computer or something while that's happening, and just in a couple seconds they will have all played, and then they'll be good, and they'll wait for you to click on them. And you can click on them as many times as you want. Watch your time, obviously, but you may listen to them as many times as you need to as you go through the audio sections. Again, making sure to keep an eye on your clock. So I think that's about it. If you have any questions about that, please text me or call me, and I can explain it to you voice to voice again. My number is pretty much everywhere, but just in case. Oh, you know what? I'm not going to say it here because this is going to go online, even though there are plenty of places to find my phone number online. But if you need to call me about those audios, if you're not sure what I'm talking about, then call me. My phone number is obviously on BlazeView, and it's also on the bottom of all the emails that you get from me. And so there. Okay, so let's dig in. On va regarder la partie 2 du chapitre 5. Les plaisirs de la table, c'est le thème en gros du chapitre 5. Et ce qu'on va faire pour le vocabulaire 2, c'est de regarder une alimentation équilibrée. So now we're talking not only just about food in general, but we're talking about which foods are good for us, which foods are bad for us, how to talk about the nutrients that we might be searching for in certain foods, and etc., etc. So there went my first yawn. We'll see how many yawns I do tonight. Doing these recordings always makes me yawn, I don't know why. On va continuer, on y go. Alors, une alimentation équilibrée. Vous avez beaucoup d'exemples ici. Pay close attention as we're going through this whole chapter. The first part of chapter 5, we talked about partitive articles and how they worked with manger, acheter, etc. And you know what? I think I might have saved that stuff. Oh well. I didn't think to pull it up in case we would want to review it. Be sure to look over your partitive articles, and especially your indefinite articles, because you're going to use those a lot with food. Here I go yawning again. And then tonight, we're actually going to look at a couple more uses for definite articles. So it doesn't mean that you can just forget about your definite articles. We're going to look at all of those tonight so that you can see yet more contrast between these different kinds of articles and get even better idea of how to use them and when. So, voilà. Alors, vous avez le vocabulaire devant vous dans votre livre si vous voulez, ou bien on va simplement regarder ici. Il y avait 2 ou 3 choses que j'allais souligner. Il y avait quelque chose que j'allais souligner, justement. Bon ben, peut-être pas. Ah, les fruits de mer. So, let me pull up. Voilà. Alors, les fruits de mer is how you say pretty much all seafood, if you're talking about seafood in general. If you're talking about fish or whatever, then there's specific words, and there's specific words for things like lobster that you see here, and les crevettes et les huîtres ou quoi que ce soit. But if you're talking about shellfish or seafood in general, c'est les fruits de mer. Et en particulier, il y a de très bonnes soupes qui sont faites des fruits de mer. There are a lot of really good soups if you really like seafood. then anywhere you go along the coast, actually in France, you can probably find some really, really, really good fruits de mer soups. So seafood chowders or seafood bisques or quoi que ce soit. Des soupes faites des fruits de mer. Elles sont délicieuses. Alors voilà. Ici, ils nous ont divisé les choses en tant que les produits laitiers, les légumes, etc. Aussi des légumes et puis de la protéine. Ça, vous avez du tofu, n'est-ce pas? Avec de l'eau, je sais pas quoi ici, alors c'est un peu bizarre. Mais on va regarder encore. Hein. Voilà. Alors, ici, vous avez les différents groupes des, euh, de la nourriture. Voilà. Alors, les glucides et les fibres, c'est-à-dire, n'est-ce pas? Et puis, les fruits et les légumes. D'accord? Vous en avez d'autres aussi, n'est-ce pas? You guys have a lot bigger list of this if you go ahead and look in part 1 and part 2 with your vocab all together, especially at the end of the chapter, obviously. Attends, pardon. Les protéines. Ah, le lait de soja, c'est ça. C'était pas de l'eau, c'était le lait de soja. Alors, soja, soy, d'accord? C'est soy milk. Et puis les produits laitiers, comme j'avais dit, du fromage, du yaourt, du lait, les matières grasses et les sucres. So grease, that is fats and sugars, and they're showing dessert for their sugar example. Voilà. Je ne sais pas trop ce qui est dans ce bol-là. C'est peut-être aussi des haricots quelconques, peut-être des haricots comme nous disons refried beans, n'est-ce pas, des haricots mexicains. Voilà. Et puis les lentilles. I find American students either totally know what lentils are or absolutely have never ever heard of them. They're in the grocery, they're next to all the other beans, and they're particularly great because they cook way faster than other beans. So when I was in undergrad, at some point, one of us decided to try to make lentils, and it was amazing. So particularly if you're on a budget and you want something fast, if you grab some lentils and some pepper and some onion, you're going to have a really yummy soup. You don't need much with lentils to make them good. And as I said, they cook really fast compared to other beans. So it's a good source of protein, etc. But they're pretty common in French cuisine. And over here I find either people really just know them completely and ate them super regularly in their family, or just have never ever heard of them before. So that's something to try if you like sometime. C'est très très bon les lentilles. Alors, à votre avis, est-ce que les étudiants prennent des repas équilibrés? Est-ce que votre alimentation est équilibrée? Et c'est une faute de frappe, hein? There's just one L in équilibré, so be careful about that, don't copy that down. Comparez votre alimentation avec celle de votre partenaire. Alors, vous allez avoir un partenaire avec quelqu'un d'autre de la classe, si vous voulez. Vous pourriez discuter de tout ça. Et sinon, on va sauter celle-là. Alors, à votre avis, est-ce que les étudiants prennent des repas équilibrés? So if you need to, pause the video and you can talk a little bit about whether you think, si vous êtes d'accord ou non. Alors, à mon avis, la plupart des étudiants ne mangent pas trop de repas équilibrés. Il y en a quand même qui mangent mieux, qui mangent très sain, mais moi je pense que la plupart ne font pas trop attention à l'alimentation équilibrée. D'accord? C'est juste mon opinion. Hein. Et numéro 2, est-ce que votre alimentation est équilibrée? Alors la mienne, and pause again if you need to as you think about this one. La mienne, ça dépend du jour. Il y a des jours où je suis super feignante, super paresseuse, super fatiguée peut-être, et je fais pas trop attention à ce que je mange. Et puis il y en a d'autres, bien sûr, où je fais très attention, j'essaie de faire de mon mieux pour manger équilibrément. Et je dirais que, bon, la majorité du temps, je fais pas mal, mais il y a toujours la possibilité d'améliorer tout ça, n'est-ce pas? There's always room for improvement with our diet and our nutrition, n'est-ce pas? Voilà, on y va. Alors pour la grammaire, on va parler des boissons et on va exprimer nos préférences. D'accord? So this is when your articles, your definite articles are coming back. And we're going to look at some more use for your partitive, specifically with this new verb, boire. D'accord? Alors, le verbe boire, to drink, is irregular. This is the only book I know of where we don't learn boire in conjunction with a couple of other pretty well-known verbs. So I didn't find any activities for us to practice online because they all included the other verbs that we usually cover at the same time as boire. That being said, this is kind of cool that you can just focus on boire by itself and in its food and drink context. The other two verbs that we usually learn in conjunction with boire don't have much to do, don't really have anything to do with food or drink, so that's one really good argument for looking at boire on its own. So here we have the boot again, like we do very often. You have these four forms: first person, second person, third person singular, and third person plural, that resemble each other, right? Again, you also have SST, which has happened on other verbs that you've had to do, right? And then you have here you kind of have to just learn that there's a V that's going to come into play, d'accord? And then my ENT ending, which of course I don't pronounce. Et puis, nous et vous qui se ressemblent, nous and vous resemble each other again, and they have kind of a wacky root that you need to remember. D'accord? So again, just like I always say, go through the verb a few times, then jump into your iLearn activities. If it's not quite automatic enough to think of the verb form or to put it in, then come back and review the verb a little bit more. But don't sit and drill the verb until you're just positive you know it inside out, because that is not helping you learn to use it. So learn it more or less, and then jump into your iLearn activities. And the best thing too then is to actually write some sentences of your own using boire, n'est-ce pas? We're just going to go through this quickly for pronunciation. This is another thing that you have on text. If you still, text does present those other two verbs that I mentioned, but at any rate, remember that text always has sound bites for all the irregular verbs, and you have sound bites for a lot of this stuff on iLearn too, so if you can't find them on there, go look on text or yell and I'll help you find them. Alors, je bois, tu bois, il boit. Same pronunciation for those three, right? And then we're going right to third person plural. Ils boivent, elles boivent. N'est-ce pas? And I'm pronouncing my V, but not my ENT, just like always. Et puis nous et vous qui se ressemblent, nous buvons, vous buvez. D'accord? So be careful of this U, right? It's totally different than all of our other U's. When you have a U isolated in the syllable like that. Like tu, n'est-ce pas? Buvons, buvez. Tandis qu'avec nous et vous, vous avez un autre ou sound, right? You have a totally different U sound with nous et vous anytime you have an OU. Voila. Because liquids are normally mass nouns and not countable, you're going to use boire with the partitive article a lot. Now, the one way that I don't agree with these guys here is that sometimes we do count a drink or a beverage that we've had or that we're going to have, and so we might use an indefinite article. So boire is kind of like manger and the other things we looked at last week, where you're generally going to be using boire with partitives and with indefinite articles. D'accord? On y va? Alors des exemples. Vous buvez du lait? D'accord? So en général, est-ce que vous buvez du lait? Do you drink milk? Oui. Oui, je bois du lait. D'accord? Non, nous buvons du vin. D'accord? So here they're changing it a little bit. Here I would say these are generalities, right? Just like we would say if we used this form of drink. And you can see too how flexible French is. I could just as easily translate this one as, are you drinking some milk? D'accord? Yes, I'm drinking some milk. Okay, without context, we don't know which one is which. And here, this could be a generality, so it doesn't have to be with the ing form. It could be, do you guys drink wine? No, we don't drink any wine. Or, no, or rather, do you drink milk? No, we drink wine. Alors, so this isn't necessarily the only these aren't the only translations possible for these. Don't forget, I don't think I've mentioned this semester yet, but present tense in French equals 3 different things. Oh, my drag isn't working right, so I have to use different fingers than normal. It's a whole big thing. Present tense in French equals 3 different present tenses in English. And you just have to go by context to know which one you should use. So here's an example. Je bois. D'accord? So je bois equals I drink. D'accord? Je vais faire un espace pour que voilà. I do drink. D'accord? I am drinking. D'accord? So this isn't something to fixate on because we don't like you to sit around translating all the time as you speak. However, it is something just to think about periodically, especially when you're writing your compos. You guys tend to want to put extra little helpers in there, and you don't need to, because bois, je bois, already means these 2 things. D'accord? And it just depends on context. So think about the differences between when I use these things up here. We talked about it being, voilà. Up here we talked about, do you drink milk? That's a very general question, right? So, en général, do you drink milk? En général. Whereas down here, this is showing that right now, right, this is much more urgent. We are drinking wine. So I can translate those the same way. I could translate both of them with the ing, both of them with just the simple present tense there. Or I can say, oui, je bois du lait, par exemple. So for for the second one, est-ce que vous buvez du lait? Je sais pas quoi. Maybe you have a context where the person is kind of doubtful, and say, yes, I do. So when I'm using this emphatic kind of present tense that we use a lot, it's going to be formed exactly the same in French. So I could just easily say, yes, I do drink milk, as the translation for this one. D'accord? So just keep thinking about that periodically. And it's not just with boire. D'accord? I did learn a little example with boire, but it's not just with boire, right? Très bien. As with prendre, indefinite articles can be used with boire. Qu'est-ce que Luc boit? Il boit un thé vert. He's having a green tea, a cup of green tea. D'accord? So especially if you think about when we talk about drinking things at home versus drinking things in a restaurant. In a restaurant, we're much more prone to say, oh, he's going to have an iced tea, she's going to have a Coke, I'm going to have a milk, they're having a coffee, etc. Tandis que dans la maison, usually in the house, I'm going to say something like, oh, are you going to have some coffee? Yeah, I'm going to have some coffee, or I'm going to have some Coke, or whatever. And there are lots of other reasons that we might change between indefinite article and partitive article. But just remember, the indefinite is referring to these things individually, right, as countable items, tandis que le partitif is talking about it very, very generally, a mass, some, etc. N'est-ce pas? So you have lots of ideas to help you keep those 2 straight. In negative statements with boire, participes and indefinites become de, just like last week with manger, acheter, etc. D'accord? So all of this should seem very familiar. Tu bois du vin rouge? Non, je ne bois pas de vin rouge. D'accord? I don't drink any red wine, or I don't drink red wine. D'accord? Vous buvez de l'eau minérale? Non, je ne bois pas d'eau minérale. And I'm defaulting to just my DE, which, of course, in front of a vowel is going to drop the E and add an apostrophe, right? Tandis qu'ici, vous n'avez pas de voyelle, bien sûr, alors de, vin rouge. Okay? So as soon as you use any of these partitives or indefinites with any verb, not just the verbs we talked about last week and not just boire, but anytime you're in a context where you happen to be using these articles, as soon as you change something to negative, you're defaulting to de. And it's basically like saying, I don't drink any, or you may not even translate it, like they don't in this one, I don't drink mineral water, I don't drink red wine, etc. Because definite articles refer to nouns in a general sense, they're used a lot with preferences. And you have lots of ways of describing preferences. So I'm just going to il est où là? Voilà. So with, I think we actually did this last week, and I'm trying to remember where my stickies were. I think I saved all the text from my stickies. Oh no, that was from another class I did for somebody else the other day. I need to start saving those. At any rate, I'm pretty sure I did something like this, where we said verbs of consumption, or I'm not going to use the quotes because then I'm going to have to use the quotes all the way through. So consumption, consumerism, if that's an easier way to think about it, sharing, partaking, having, buying, etc. are normally going to be using partitive and or indefinite articles. And then, of course, we're defaulting to de when, and I'm just going to do this so it's a little bit easier to read. We're defaulting to de in the negative in all of those contexts. Now, verbs, and think about the different verbs that we have with that. So we'll actually do some examples. So, par exemple, boire, bien sûr, comme on vient d'en parler, manger, acheter, avoir, très souvent, partager, which means to share, prendre, comme on disait la semaine dernière, etc. N'est-ce pas? So I'm going to scoot this over just a little bit. Et puis, je vais faire que ça soit comme ça. Très bien. Voilà. Et puis, avec d'autres verbes, verbs of preference, we're using, je vais faire que ça soit, oh, voilà. Alors, des verbes de préférence comme aimer, comme ils disent, adorer, détester, aimer bien, préférer, n'est-ce pas? Or any negatives of these verbs. So with the definite articles, I'm not going to change once I go into negative, right? And actually, I'm going to do a little reminder here. D'accord? Oh. I do not like how I'm having to, voila, highlight stuff right now. I've got to figure out what's wrong with my preferences. Et puis, oh, I forgot. These were actually the examples, right? Alors, partitive and or definite articles, indefinite, definite articles, right? And in that case, au négatif, same, no change. Okay? So that gives you an idea. Alors, on va regarder. And remember that when we say verbs of preference, we mean not only things that talk about liking things, but things that talk about not liking things, right? So you still would use a definite article regardless. Vous avez des exemples? J'adore les biscuits. En général, n'est-ce pas? Les biscuits. Aimez-vous la viande rouge? La viande rouge. Nous aimons mieux le poisson. J'aime beaucoup le tofu et les lentilles. N'est-ce pas? Moi, je déteste le tofu. D'accord? Alors, je faisais un peu français ici, un peu trop français là, tofu. Mais voilà. Encore un truc que j'allais vous mentionner juste à côté. Hein. One other thing I was just going to say, kind of as a side reminder or a side tip. A lot of people have trouble with articles in general and just thinking, well, because there are contexts where you aren't necessarily going to have a clue in the verb itself or in the context itself, and you'll have to know what article is going to work the best with this. There are lots of verbs that can take any kind of article. So one really cool thing to think about with definite articles, usually these refer to generalities where in English we wouldn't even have an article. D'accord? La guerre est horrible. D'accord? So, I think we can all agree that war is horrible, right? And in English, I'm not even going to say the war, right? I'm going to say war in general is horrible. D'accord? So that's one main thing that you're going to see. Another main thing that you're going to see is when you're talking about, so I'm going to actually say these can refer to generalities where in English we wouldn't even have an article. They can also refer to very specific things, right? So where we would use an article, we would use the, of course, in English. Okay? Donne-moi le zapper. Give me the remote. Right now. Let me have it. Tu joues trop avec, alors donne-moi le zapper. So in this case, of course, we're talking very specifically. The remote that is right there in your hand, right? So you can see that these are super opposed to each other using definite articles, either in cases where something is super general or super specific. D'accord? So that just gives you another little side note to think about with definite articles. And then our big thing that we use them with, verbs of preference. D'accord? Remember that in negatives, it's not going to change. So we said this already, definite articles are going to stay the same whether you're talking about something in affirmative or negative. Alors des exemples, je n'aime pas les aliments industriels. D'accord? Pierre n'aime pas la viande rouge. D'accord? Alors ça ne fait rien que ça soit au négatif. Au négatif, à l'affirmatif, ça ne fait rien. No difference whether you're talking about negative or affirmative. Alors, on va pratiquer avec, je pense. Alors, ça doit être la dernière. Oui, le dernier, je veux dire. Et j'allais chercher s'il y avait d'autres choses à souligner. Non, je pense pas. Ok. Alors, on va regarder notre premier exercice avec. Et je vais faire que ça soit plus grand dans un instant, là. So, voilà. I know these are really hard to see in, let's see what happens. Oh, goody. I know these are really hard to see in the videos, especially if you're looking on Blackboard Collaborate. If you look on the YouTube video, not only do you not have that weird line where it keeps refreshing the image, but normally you can see this kind of stuff a little bit better. Voilà. Alors, regardez avec moi activité 1, activité I, je veux dire. Qui boit quoi? Quand on fait la fête, on sert une variété de boissons. Trouvez le sujet de chaque phrase. Alors, ça dépend de la forme du verbe, n'est-ce pas? So we're going to grab whatever subject matches our verb the best. Oui? Alors, on va faire que les impairs, n'est-ce pas? So we talked, I think, last week about... oh, ben, c'est pas grave. About verbs... Oh, I'm sorry, about impair ou pair. So when we're just doing the odds, ce sont les impairs. Quand c'est les evens, alors les pairs. D'accord? And you can kind of see why these would be matched up that way. Right? Comme une paire de chaussures, n'est-ce pas? And these can be used as nouns or as adjectives. So les numéros pairs, les numéros impairs, or juste les pairs, les impairs. D'accord? So we're just going to do les impairs. Numéro 1, qu'est-ce que vous me dites? So pause the video if you need to. Buvons. Alors bien sûr, c'est, n'est-ce pas? Nous buvons de l'eau minérale. Numéro 3, on va sauter au prochain impair. Numéro 3, bois un coca. So pause the video if you need to. Elle, tu, il. Elle boit un coca. N'est-ce pas? Numéro 5, boivent du thé glacé. Pause the video if you need to. Ils pluriel, n'est-ce pas? Ils boivent du thé glacé. On va sauter au numéro 8. Hein? We already did one with number 7. Alors, numéro 8. Buvez du chocolat chaud. Nous, tu, vous. Qu'est-ce que vous me dites? Vous, n'est-ce pas? Alors, l'autre chose que j'aimerais qu'on fasse avec tout ça, we're actually going to, and I meant to, that's okay. Oh. That is really driving me crazy. I have to try to get help with this crazy setting thing tomorrow if I can. Because I'm having to scroll very weirdly. Ok, on va faire au négatif. D'accord? Alors regardons le numéro 1. On avait nous buvons de l'eau minérale. N'est-ce pas? Au négatif, qu'est-ce que vous me donnez? So remember what happens in negative? What's going to happen? We're going to default to de, n'est-ce pas? Because we're talking about a partitive or an indefinite. Voilà. Nous ne buvons pas. And if you need to do it in steps, do it in steps. So we could go ahead and just give ourselves the whole word if we want. D'accord? And then we can go back and see if there are any other details we need to tie up. And here we have two vowels next to each other, apostrophe. D'accord? Alors regardons numéro 3. Alors on a dit elle. Oh. D'accord? So up here we had the partitive, and then we defaulted, come out of the way, and then we defaulted to de, right? Even if I have an indefinite, I'm still going to default to de. D'accord? Alors au négatif, elle ne boit pas de coca. D'accord? Numéro 5 alors, ils boivent du thé glacé. N'est-ce pas? Et puis, au négatif, ils ne boivent pas de thé glacé. D'accord? Voilà. Il n'y avait que celui-là qui était avec un indéfini. We're going to change number 8. I'm going to change number 8 to have a definite article. So let's say you were ordering this in a restaurant. You were drinking it in a restaurant. Vous buvez un chocolat chaud. So bear in mind, this is the wrong answer because we're changing our article, but it's totally fine. Et puis, au négatif, alors, pour voir que ça aussi, ça va faire un défaut en deux. Vous ne buvez pas de chocolat chaud. D'accord? Vous avez le 1, votre indéfini qui va changer en 2. So I have my default for de, which happens not only with my indefinites, but with my partitives. D'accord? As soon as I put any of these in negative, I'm defaulting to de. As long as I have these verbs of, and you can think of these however you need to. If there's one word here that really makes sense and really is your key to all these different kinds of verbs, then cool. If it's easier for you to think about these kinds of ideas as a group, then cool. If you have some way to kind of put these together in your head and remember them for a while till you get some more practice with them and they get more automatic, then cool. However you need to remember them. But it's this kind of verb that we're going to use with partitives and indefinites. And it's verbs of preference and lots of other situations where we're going to use definites instead. D'accord? Alors, voilà. Et puis avec le partitif et l'indéfini, bien sûr, vous allez faire le défaut de. We're going to default to de in the negative with these, right? Et on continue. Alors attendez, parce qu'il y avait un autre exercice que vous voulez qu'on fasse et il faut que j'allume. I'm sitting here in the dark. Voilà. I get carried away and I forget to turn on the light. So, y en avait un autre que... Oh, oui. Okay, this is the one I wanted to do next. Alors... So, in this case, what we're doing is we're deciding between affirmative or negative based on what you have left in the rest of the sentence. D'accord? So think very carefully about what we just said. How do you decide between your partitive or your indefinite or de on its own? D'accord? What's the big difference there? And we're going to jump in. Alors, pour numéro 1, vous voulez que j'écrive? Is it better for you when I write them so that you have something to look at later? It's kind of dorky. I'll go ahead and do it just with this activity. We don't do it all the time, so we don't always do it. We don't do it too much, I don't think. So, but for this one, I want to. Or what we're really going to do is I'm simply going to we'll do a little abbreviation or something each time. So for number 1, qu'est-ce que vous me donnez? En fait, oh ça va. Je vais mettre comme ça. Et puis je vais mettre comme ça. Puis je vais l'élargir comme ça. Et c'est bon. Alors pour numéro 1, and look at your examples, or your choices. Nous buvons, nous ne buvons pas. So which one of these is going to go with de l'eau minérale? And I'm just going to write the verb. Buvons, n'est-ce pas? Nous buvons de l'eau minérale. Numéro 2, de café. Alors pour numéro 1, nous buvons de l'eau minérale. And think to yourself why we are using the affirmative given what's given here, right? And something's different here, so what do we need? And if you need to pause the video, please don't forget. Ne buvons pas de café, par exemple. D'accord? Alors ici, vous avez le défaut. I have my default de here, which means negative, n'est-ce pas? Numéro 3. Oh, I just looked ahead at number 4. I have one of my girlfriends that really likes Mountain Dew, so It just always makes me laugh to see stuff about Mountain Dew. Alors, numéro 3, ça ne fait rien. That's neither here nor there. Du jus d'orange. Alors, buvons, bien sûr. Pause the video if you need to, if we're doing the answer too quickly. Puis numéro 4, de Mountain Dew. Ce qui n'existe pas du tout en France, d'ailleurs. Or you may find it, I guess, somewhere in some kind of novelty place, but in general, you can't buy Mountain Dew in France. You probably can in Canada. I don't know. I don't care for Mountain Dew, so I didn't look for Mountain Dew while I was in Canada, while I was in Quebec. So that's on you guys. You got to go check and see if Canada has Mountain Dew. So have fun in Quebec this weekend checking for Mountain Dew. Qu'est-ce que vous me donnez alors? De Mountain Dew, n'est-ce pas? Ne buvons pas. And we don't have to do too many of these. We could do one more. Du thé vert. Alors, buvons, bien sûr. Okay? In affirmative. And the rest of these should be fairly clear to you. D'accord? In negative, I'm defaulting to my de. Affirmative, I'm using my entire partitive, which is basically de plus an article, right? Just like your de contractions that you did way back when. So de on its own is my negative default for the partitive. Okay? Et on va continuer. Oh, il y avait un autre. Ok. On va regarder le aller plus loin. So, pour aller plus loin, this is something that a lot of the time we don't really look at until considerably later. So it's interesting they're mentioning it to you now. And it's not something that I would say you have to get down pat right away. In some circumstances, learning whether you need a or de to talk about the nature or the flavor of a certain food can be a little bit tricky. So for now, just think about the examples they're giving us here, and don't worry too much about creating these kinds of combos on your own, because usually it's a set phrase, okay? And I'll talk about what I mean in a second. So to say that juice is a certain kind of fruit, you're going to use de. So jus d'orange, juice of oranges, right? Jus d'orange, jus de framboise, jus de pomme. D'accord? So what I meant was by saying that it was a set expression or a set term is that this is the only way you're ever going to hear anybody say orange juice. So it's going to be relatively easy to remember that it's jus d'orange and doesn't have an a anywhere. Okay? By the same token, or jus de tomate, or jus de pamplemousse, or je sais pas quoi, n'est-ce pas? Lots of different kinds of juices that we could talk about. And when you're talking about whether you're using, if you're using a with certain words or certain food items, that's going to be the same way. You're never going to hear somebody say une tarte de pomme. You're going to hear them say une tarte aux pommes. Okay, so what's going to happen is that's just going to kind of become a set way in your head for saying apple pie. Or we should say apple tart, because une tarte, c'est pas du tout la même chose qu'un pie. Okay, bon, pas du tout, mais c'est assez différent, n'est-ce pas? These two items are pretty different from each other. Yes, they both have apples and they both have crust. They both have kind of a glaze. But beyond that, they're very different. Alors, une tarte aux pommes is the only way I'm going to ever hear anybody say this. Une tarte au bleuet, c'est pas? Un gâteau aux fraises. D'accord? You're not going to hear them say de in any of those cases. So it's going to be something that's just going to stick in your head that way. Une tarte aux pommes. Just as if it's a single vocab word, which really is what it is. With mass nouns, such as chocolate or cheese, a is contracted, okay, to talk about that thing in singular. So kind of the same way we said une tarte aux pommes, now we're saying des biscuits au chocolat, d'accord? Un gâteau au chocolat, un gâteau au fromage, d'accord? Now I'll tell you one extra thing, but I don't want you to get hung up on it, okay? But if you think about the nature of orange juice versus the nature of chocolate cookies or the nature of an apple tart? Which one of these has more of the second item in it? So oranges, apples, chocolate. Jus d'orange, n'est-ce pas? Jus d'orange is made way more essentially of oranges than these other things. And if you think about it, you'll understand what I mean. So a pie or a tart is going to have the crust, as I said, it's going to have the glaze, all that stuff, and it's going to have apples in it, right? But apple juice, for example, is way more apple, right? It's almost all apple. And probably if you buy really good apple juice, it is all apple, right? And there's nothing else going on in there, right? Whereas a tarte aux pommes has apples in it, it's apple flavored, or however you want to think about it, but there's not as much connection, okay? The same thing with les biscuits au chocolat. So I can have chocolate cookies, but think about all the other stuff that is in these cookies, right? Flour, eggs, whatever, and then some chocolate to flavor it, right? But it doesn't have as big a percentage of chocolate in it as, for example, apple juice does apples, or orange juice does oranges, etc. So if you think about this a little bit, you'll understand what I mean, that when you've got de involved, normally it's a much bigger deal for that thing to be made with the second thing, okay, or of the second thing. Whereas normally with o, with a and o, it is flavored with it or contains it, but it has lots of other stuff going on too, right? Alors, très bien. So for now, as I said, don't get super fixated on this a ou de stuff. There's probably going to be one activity or so in iLearn that lets you play with it a little bit. But as you're speaking, if you accidentally said de instead of o or something when you're talking to someone, they would understand what you meant because you would have the two keywords there. So if I accidentally said les biscuits de chocolat, they would still understand what I meant. Okay, so don't get too hung up on this, but it is kind of interesting to think about. Alors, donnez les noms de ces boissons et ces desserts en français. Numéro 1. So you may have to stop and go look up your vocab, right? Et moi, je vais ouvrir encore une fenêtre pour qu'on puisse regarder ces exemples. Oh, je voulais faire ça en fait. Ok. Et je vais faire que ça soit plus grand. Voilà. Alors, pour numéro 1, so you hopefully looked and you saw you reminded yourself how to say grapes. And you have juice right here at the very top of your pour aller plus loin. Alors, le jus de raisin. And I don't know why, but we always make the fruit singular, even though, of course, it's got more than one grape in it. Just like in English, say grape juice instead of grapes juice. Numéro 2, strawberry juice. Ooh. Sometimes I buy that strawberry nectar. It's in the Latino foods aisle at the grocery. They have all kinds of fruit nectars, and one of them is strawberry nectar, and it's really good. All of the nectars are good, but the strawberry nectar is really good. Alors, le jus de fraise, n'est-ce pas? Numéro 3, a raspberry pie. Alors, une tarte aux framboises, n'est-ce pas? Because now we're talking about something that, yes, is made of raspberries, but doesn't have the nature of this tart is not exclusively raspberries. Okay, so that's another way to think about it. Numéro 4, a chocolate pie, une tarte au chocolat, n'est-ce pas? Numéro 5, a strawberry cake. Oh, pardon. And we do go ahead and use the plurals if it's logical to do so when you're using them with O, n'est-ce pas? Et puis numéro 6, qu'est-ce que vous me dites pour a banana cake? Oh, voilà. Oh, banane. D'accord? Voilà. Alors ça vous donne une idée, hein, une petite idée. Remembering the difference between de and a. D'accord? And when you're translating these, it's not going to make that much difference. You're not really going to fixate on whether it's de or a, right? We just use this as the adjective, basically. So grape juice, just like they have in your examples, grape juice, strawberry juice, raspberry pie. We're not going to worry about translating for the de or the a, right? Oh, voilà. Oh, voilà. Très bien. Alors, ici, ce que vous allez faire avec votre... si vous avez un partenaire quelconque ou si vous voulez prétendre que vous avez un partenaire, or just pause the video as you go through and you can use whichever verb matches your personal preference. D'accord? So this is kind of to reinforce in our minds that, look at this kind of verb, détester, ne pas aimer, aimer bien, aimer beaucoup, adorer, right? We talked about these. Verbs of preference, what am I going to use with them? Definite articles, no matter what, right? So this exercise hopefully will kind of drive that home for you. Okay? Alors, pour numéro 1, and all of you can't use, none of these are wrong, okay? Basically what you're just thinking about is you personally, if you like seafood, then you know which ones you can choose. If you don't like seafood, then you have specific ones you can choose. Alors moi, j'aime bien les fruits de mer. D'accord? J'aime bien les fruits de mer. So do it for yourself too. Est-ce que tu détestes les fruits de mer? Est-ce que tu adores les fruits de mer? Etc. Pause the video if you need to. Number 2, moi j'adore les pâtes. Je passe quasiment pas une semaine sans, bon, bien sûr pas une semaine, mais peut-être même pas 3 jours sans manger des pâtes parce que je les adore. Alors voilà, pour vous, est-ce que vous aimez les pâtes? Est-ce que vous détestez les pâtes? Etc. So pâtes, do you remember what this is? Pasta. And I believe that when we talked about this last week, I said something about how when you have a circumflex, normally in English you have an S. So, and this is something I love to talk about, but I'm not going to spend too much more time on, but basically a circumflex in Old French replaced an S that used to be in that word. So if you think about pâte, right, comes from pasta, or is our word for pasta, and look, I have A circumflex, AS. What other word did you learn way back at the beginning probably that does the same thing? Ça commence avec H. Oh, there are two kind of similar. Hôtel, right? So this one, actually, let's do the other one because it's usually a little more logical for you guys. Hôpital, right? And we use an S there, hospital. Now there's another one that you may not know or may not have used the English word that much, but hôtel comes from the word hostel, which still exists in English but is different than a hotel now, right? But that's what it came from, hostel. D'accord? If anybody knows German, because sometimes you have a circumflex and you're like, well, that doesn't look like anything in English. Fenêtre, d'accord? So if anybody knows German, this word in French actually came from German. And look what's going on. Fenster, Fenster, d'accord? So this S took the place, is shown in the French version by the circumflex. And there's a reason for that, but I'm just going to let your curiosity go crazy. I know, you're just going to be itching to find out what's the deal with the circumflex. So remind me, and we'll talk about it. But it's really cool. Isn't that cool? Hôpital, hospital, pâte, pasta, etc. Il y en a beaucoup, hein, énormément d'exemples en fait. Alors voilà. Pour numéro 2, alors, moi j'adore les pâtes. Est-ce que vous aimez les pâtes? Est-ce que vous détestez les pâtes, etc. Pause the video if you need to stop and talk about your preference or non-preference for pasta. Numéro 3, la nourriture chinoise. Moi j'aime bien, j'aime beaucoup, j'aime bien. J'aime bien la nourriture chinoise. Il y a des jours où j'adore, n'est-ce pas? Voilà. Alors, faites poser la vidéo pour que vous puissiez répondre. Est-ce que vous l'aimez? Est-ce que vous la détestez? La 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 la. Voilà. Numéro 4, alors, j'adore la pizza. J'adore. Et faites poser la vidéo pour que vous puissiez en parler vous-même. Si vous la détestez, vous l'adorez, vous quoi que ce soit. Numéro 5, j'adore le sushi. J'adore la nourriture, voilà, j'adore la bouffe. Alors, j'adore le sushi. Il y a beaucoup d'Américains qui n'aiment pas le sushi, hein. Alors, peut-être que vous ne l'aimez pas. Peut-être que vous le détestez même. So pause the video if you need to stop and talk about whether you like it or not. Numéro 6. J'aime bien la cuisine végétarienne. D'accord? J'aime bien la cuisine végétarienne. Etc. N'est-ce pas? Alors, végétalienne, this is a new term. Don't hear it in English too much, but basically, if you're eating, it's a lot of salad and stuff, but also pasta. So things that are, you're still going to eat things that we sometimes think of as being bad for us, carbs, etc., but you're not necessarily eating meat. Et puis le fast food, bien sûr. On disait dans le temps aussi, I don't hear people say this too much anymore, but way back when, and you can still say it for food that's not very good for you, but that you really like, la cochonnerie. D'accord? La cochonnerie. What is in here? Have you guys learned any animals? Alors, un cochon is a pig, right? So la cochonnerie is kind of like food that you pig out on, or food that's not particularly good for you. So junk food, fast food, voilà. I can't think of any other ways to say it. It seems like there's another way to say that. Mais voilà. Très bien. Alors, je pense qu'on va s'arrêter là. Attendez, je vais vérifier s'il y avait une autre chose que je voulais qu'on fasse. Voilà. En fait, regardons l'exercice O. I remember I didn't get this one written down, but I did think about it a while ago when I was thinking about our lesson. This one we really are choosing between partitive or not, or that is, we're really remembering which verbs are calling for partitive and which ones aren't, right? So think back to our little key, and if you want, what I can do is put this out to the side a little bit. Voilà. Et je vais faire que ça soit moins grand. Oh, peut-être comme ça, hein, c'est bon. Et on va le mettre de côté. Oh, I forgot, I have to use 3 fingers. That's driving me absolutely crazy. I really hope I can figure that out. I Googled my head off today trying to figure out how to fix it, and I have not found a way to fix it yet. Ah! Ok. Numéro 1 alors. Vous allez choisir entre les deux possibilités pour commencer la phrase. D'accord? Faites très attention à l'article. Ok? Et faites attention à ce que vous choisissiez le verbe qui est approprié pour l'article ici. N'est-ce pas? Ou l'usage approprié. D'accord? So think about again, verbs of consumption, boire, prendre, etc. I'm using the partitive or the indefinite, and I'm defaulting to de. So I'm going to be on the lookout for partitives, indefinites, and de, right? And with verbs of preference, I'm looking for definite articles. D'accord? And again, don't, drill this stuff until it's just etched in stone in your brain. You don't want to do that. You just want to look at these a little bit, remind yourself, and then go over and do a few. If you're just having so much trouble that you need to go back and look at the rules a little bit or look at these guides a little bit, then do that. And then go back to your activity again, okay? And little by little, your brain is going to grab this stuff, and it's going to let it root, for lack of a better word. And it's going to do it better that way than it would if you just drilled on these tips and then went and jumped in over here. Okay, so really try to make it kind of a combo. and where you're really pushing your brain to remember on its own as much as possible. And you're only looking over here if you absolutely have to. Okay? Pour numéro 1, alors, les oranges, vous avez un défini, alors, Edouard n'aime pas les oranges. D'accord? Même que ça soit au négatif, we know that in negative, we're still not going to change it. Numéro 2, du jus d'orange. So pause the video if you need to, if we're going too quickly. Alors, Bill boit du jus d'orange. Si c'est dit Bill ne boit pas, bien sûr, on changerait ça à de. Okay, so it would default to my de if it were B, right? Numéro 3, d'agneau. Alors, Stacy ne mange pas d'agneau. D'accord? Tous les deux, c'est au négatif, mais on a le de. Alors, partitif, conjonction, etc. Numéro 4, le poulet frit. Alors, Win adore le poulet frit. Numéro 5, so pause the video if you need to, because we're going pretty quickly. I just realized we have 4 minutes before the little session is going to close, and I think it still lets us go beyond it if we're still in there, but just in case, I can't remember for sure. Alors, Edouard déteste le fromage. Oh, c'est dommage, hein? Sauf que là, ça laisse plus de fromage pour nous. Moi, j'adore le fromage, alors. Du gâteau au fromage. Alors, Bill prend du gâteau au fromage. Ce qu'on ne mange pas en France, d'ailleurs. Mais peut-être au Canada, je ne sais pas, au Québec. Voilà. Mais en France, ça n'existe pas, hein, le gâteau au fromage. Le café. Alors, Stacy adore le café. Verbe de préférence. Article défini. Numéro 8, alors. Edouard ne boit pas de bière. I'm defaulting to my de. Right? Edouard ne boit pas de bière. Très bien. Alors, on va s'arrêter là. Lots and lots of announcements at the beginning of this video. So don't forget to note those or whatever. I'm going to try to remember right now to go ahead and post my little office hours change. And the quiz for this week may not get posted till tomorrow night, but it will be posted as soon as possible. And you have the quiz from last week, which was wacky, so you have an extra week to work on it. So get both of those turned in. This week, I'm going to try very hard to get all my stuff posted on time so that we can start observing what our deadlines have supposed to have been from the get-go. I think that's really bad English. Have supposed to have been. Have supposed to have been. Now it sounds right. It just sounds weird. Voilà. Alors, bonne soirée et faites-moi des mails, des messages, des textes, quoi que ce soit. Si vous avez des questions quelconques, n'hésitez pas, bien sûr. Tomorrow night, don't forget, office hours at 6:30. Et voilà. Alors, bonne continuation. Salut tout le monde. Au revoir. Oh my gosh, Camtasia went down while we were doing it. Did it? No, it didn't. Okay. Alors.